Hello everyone, today we talk about the flame of Vesta and the secret of perennial transfiguration, defying all odds, right, of physical health currently, because, if I stop because of this, what is this for, to begin with? We will talk about Vesta's mythology and symbology, Roman history through sort of extensive documentary and iconographic evidence in another video. Today what we look at is really the meaning and symbol of the flame, which is all one with Vesta, and that, as we have discussed already in that video about the moral superiority of the Roman civilization and Indo-European interpretation, we observed how relevant it is, like the role of a woman within the Roman hierarchy, and of course a heavily virile authority. Other Indo-European peoples' sacred fire preservation was entrusted to men. The fact that the Romans choose women has not just to do with the, of course, the Pelagian substratum that existed, of course, in all these mythologies here and there. In this case, it's quite relevant because of the actual meaning of sacred fire. But it also highlights the standards, the same Roman women in the full traditional understanding of, the soul of chivalry, like of the Roman hero, right? And so the standard of the Roman matronae, virgins, in this case, was in order for the entire universe to maintain its foundations. This is particularly relevant because it shows how confident actually Roman virility was in the possession of womanhood, right, in their evangelion of world domination as God's chosen people, to in fact entrust sacred fire to these priestesses, right? So that's an aspect we will understand better, like in a more figurative sense, in another video. What today I want to discuss is actually the deeper meaning of the sacred fire within the Roman tradition, with the same orbs as at the center of the world in this system for in fact all future peoples under her control and beyond. I made a video about the cosmic centrality of Rome in the history of mankind that explains this a bit, and it's all one with these symbols: the flame of Vesta, the Fasces Lectoriae, the Ark of Janus. We will all look at these in sequence. Also today we do not simply conclude this speech, as you understand here from part 1. In any case, the Temple of Vesta definitely houses a profound traditional core, to say the least. It's the Indo-European sacred glory, all right? It's the center of the world. It's the capacity of mankind to perennially transfigure, right, to come back to God. A sacred repository formed by the 6 virgins who symbolize as such the entirety of the cosmos, like as the female half of it. These 2 elements, earth and fire, serve as the extremes, with one reflecting descent and the other ascent, right? This is why also the women are entrusted to contrast even more this victory over death of the light, like the Sol Invictus, that was very far from sort of an Eastern thing. It was present among all the Indo-European peoples. There are, in the case of Rome, like some sanctuaries in Sabina from multiple centuries before Christ, and we talk about the sacred royalty in that function. So this truly perennial transfiguration, eternally rising as the kings of the lineage. Yet there is more, of course, to Vesta herself. She embodies these 2 elements as they are intrinsically linked, right? Much like the points of 2 opposing triangles that represent 2 parallel worlds in an inverted manner, right? Stressing the connection there between the upper and the lower nature. This also mirrors the interaction between true existence and its reflection in water, which acts as a reversed image, right? So just a projection of the higher nature. Examining this symbol further, we find a singular foundation from which two realities diverge. One is genuine and valid, right, the divine nature, while the other is a mere reflection, the human one, an illusion reliant on the surface of the water for its existence and longevity. It's as if you could read, of course, the eternal principles through these overlapping images, right, of the higher nature. And so you cannot, as we explained in multiple videos, simply do without these elements. It would be at least a dualistic heresy. You need these elements exactly to come back to the higher principle. And of course the distortion of the aforementioned reflection is dictated by the water's movements that are not just empty, like they are moved by still a divine force at the end of the day. There is an inverse analogy between heaven and earth. What exists below parallels what is above, albeit in a reversed fashion. Right? It's not a determinism like, let's say, with current astrology, pretending that you're impressed with characteristics that were basically just imposed on you at birth. Everything that happens reflects every other part within the universe, and so it's just like the natural order from which life proceeded. So consequently, humanity must elevate itself by flipping its perspective if it seeks to correct its fleeting distortion as well, maintained by the earthly condition, the human one, in fact, by journeying through the overall design of the world to attain divine completeness. The sacred fire, diligently safeguarded by the 6 Vestals, symbolizes exactly this metamorphosis. This eternal flame encapsulates the essence of traditional wisdom, preserved by its guardians who routinely share it to counterbalance the world's disintegration. The flame can never be extinguished, of course, and thus, right, this flame, it is not just an earthly flame, it's also a divine one, maintains the vital link to the unseen realm. I made a video about, again, the doctrine of the two natures that you can use as a point of reference, basically, for most of traditional understanding. And so this is essential for humanity's survival, right? So also for those who just follow the sacred leader, and that otherwise wouldn't really have, at least they wouldn't really enact on their own that divine potential within themselves. It could not happen, however, from the leader without this element as well, right? This is the concept of, again, the fasces lectoriae, the empire to begin with. If Vesta's flame were to be extinguished, and if the sacred knowledge were to leave the world, it would turn to dust, similarly to how a reflection vanishes when the true entity from which it derives no longer exists. Therefore, tradition and its profound secrets are vital to the existence of humanity on earth, as they protect that sacred and untouchable repository from the profane. Modern Western society often neglects the fact that an increasing focus on depth seeks to erode the already limited realm of the sacred. Right? This encroachment infiltrates all aspects of existence, tarnishing the boundaries of sacred spaces and contaminating the areas where holy symbols and emblems of transformative power reside with elements of life, art, and science. This is why the centrality of Rome is so important. Right? This phenomenon is a consequence of the anti-traditional current that marked the end of the great medieval civilization, which essentially dismantled, humanly speaking, the foundations of Romanity through 3 distinct waves, namely, or at least like this can be debated to a degree, especially the Renaissance that still had, all of these movements had a traditional relevance, but it was emptied, basically, every step of the way. And this, of course, existed for, was the case for so many other dynamics preceding, in between them, right, but also preceding them. We're talking the Renaissance, in particular the Reformation and the Revolution, each pursuing similar goals but differing in form and impact. This process undermined the pillars of knowledge and law, which represent the spiritual and the temporal, right? And just think about how the temporal is loaded today. What people want to live without sacred and without temporal power. So pure chaos, anarchy, foretestators, destroying the entire system without understanding practically anything about themselves, about tradition, even when they call themselves conservatives. They're light years away from any actual cultural, personal, or moral awareness of tradition. This is naturally better understood by seeing Vesta's flame as the awareness of the sacred in the heart of man, but there is probably a very deep connection with imperial Catholic tradition, right? Fire purifies. This is a sacrificial fire, right? And the sense is that you must essentially keep generating this power by entering in consonance with the immanent force that resides in the universe, and the fire can never go out, because that would mean that you're essentially not able to tribute this sacrifice to God. And this entails, of course, the conquest of the world, right? The essentially the defeat, the burning wood of the deteriorator aspect of the self, the human, the telluric one, that is able to transfigure in the fire. So this, in part, mirrors this polyopima, the human sacrifice to Jupiter Optimus Maximus during the Roman triumph, when the emperor, for a while holding that power, is similar to God, also in the red of the face that, of course, is connected with the sun, with the eternal flame, right? And a continuous tribute to God thus equates to a world order that is able to regenerate itself, right? By the necessity of sinning, of destroying, in order to gain that higher wisdom and establishing a law in the world accordingly. Efforts for this reason were made. Of course, we discussed this again in the aforementioned video about the Roman moral superiority, because most people think again that they're completely phobic towards authority, because they think evidently they do not have any chance to confront with it and win, right? And that's the only reason, right? You must necessarily confront with authority in order to become the authority yourself. And this does not pass through wishful thinking or by withdrawal or pretending that the world order does not exist, or it's not even supposed to exist. There's always an influence that you have on anyone. The myth of the Adamitic guy out there that is free and whatever, it's of course the most miserable human condition that you can achieve. And we understand here how the world, just even in complete lack of traditional understanding, fully buys that. And this is obviously in the last stages of human degeneration. And so the efforts made to extinguish the sacred flame of Vesta occurred by contrasting the two converging traditions in Rome and interpreting them in manners that diverge entirely from orthodox. Essentially a classist vision that populists increasingly have. They think that there is a sort of elite, right, that is an incredibly childish sociological notion, because, first of all, this elite does not control the system without you to begin with, because that's the actual traditional point. And secondly, there is actually a value of merit in the establishment that may be actually the backbone of the system, aside from the individual elites, sort of disproportionately projected by the media just to trigger like some elite, not other, that instead is the good one. And we could digress on how this happened for different countries historically, but the result seems, at least we'll again discuss it somewhere else, but for the sake of today's world, I think this is pretty much overly fitting, practically any kind of populism right now, which is also populism that criticizes this elite in sort of the freest world existing at this point, and they're sort of capriciously wanting to go under the single most tyrannic regimes and being fine with that and closing an eye with that. That's how lesser people destroy them instead and self-actualize themselves. And in that sense, it's at least their own fault. I mean, at least there is payback, but of course the entire world degenerates further in the process. It's a collective damage. And traditionally, of course, a belief system must be grasped in its totality to begin with. As you know, I started making these videos about tradition, and I believe that just like, 1/3 of the people is sort of accepting the premises, but not even actually understanding what I'm talking about. People, again, as we'll see it now, like think that they're born under different flags, and that's basically what the sacred is supposed to be. Except, again, there is none of those flags ruling the world, unlike with Rome, and with a huge deal that followed from it, including the medieval civilization, trying to restore that stage of mankind, that golden age temporarily affirmed between the bronze and the iron one by prophecy, by the way of the European mythology. So you understand that, without core principles and practical effectiveness of its applications, there is literally nothing. I don't know people that know what I'm talking about. I mean, I know them when I study their works. I know them where I know, of course, this historiography exists, but like the average person everywhere I discuss this stuff with does not really have a clue of the fact that this stuff is even a thing. And that's the thing that really perplexes me the most, because it's not even occult knowledge to some extent. It's just, having basic education or cultural background. You don't have to be even the top academic to know this stuff. But also you should understand you should make a hell of an effort at the same time in order to get there, compared to the degree of, horrifying inertia that you live in nowadays. As I was saying before, I made multiple videos on especially the Renaissance, also the French Revolution. Not so much about the Reformation, which in part, it's very interesting. I will start, of course, as a topic, not because I'm particularly inclined towards it, but we will surely at some point soon start dealing with properly modern history, just like we do with the medieval one, in parallel to that. So the various, aside from this content I've already made, of course today we can't simply digress on those major topics. So all the time, the circumstances are now useless to be cited, as they reflect an external change that is permissible only if it does not disrupt the authentic progression of tradition, right? And this is especially true in the Catholic world. In any case, the modern world, in part, has essentially opposed Roman and traditional values for centuries, even though Roman symbols are present practically on all flags, like institutions, every country in the world, for obvious reasons. This has become just a mechanistic mimicking of an imagery that is not matched by an actual, at least, of course, the original meaning. I don't want to belittle that, right? I think that, the American eagle there stands for, a consistent part of what Romanity once was, compared only to essentially the rest of the world, to a great extent, at least in that eagle symbolism. And of course, again, as long as people exist, tradition sort of doesn't die, right? Even if it's sort of sinking, So it's never like fully over, but it's definitely degenerated. And so even while professing a desire to revert to humanity, in many cases, ultimately this resulted in mere imitations and superficial references. And that's why, as I was just saying, there are so many people who think that they're conservative because they basically have as a point of reference other people, which is a complete, so just a convention, a subnormal convention that has nothing to do with the only point of reference in tradition, that is God. You can see this a bit throughout the ages anyway, like if in humanism, for example, there was, and all these movements were sort of a good and a bad aspect, but in general, times did deteriorate in terms of the individual moral quality. There was a regressive trend that introduced anti-traditional mindsets. I made a video, for example, about the revival of classical Latin, like in 15th century Europe, which essentially was exactly the moment in which Latin stopped being a spoken language and just sort of an antiquarian object of imitation, right? So not the language that had maintained, and it still does. Like if you study, of course, the language, its Roman and Catholic essence. Again, I still have people that come on my channel and hear Catholic and they think that what I mean is, just the narrowly intended, say, conventionally intended confession as an option like the others, or, they don't even understand that Catholicism existed before Christianity. And this is apparently the thing they just can't come to terms with. Like they're so, and that also the measure of how completely alienated from any actual meaning, etymology, even that would be enough, right, to spark some interest in the traditional lyric. That zero, right? Remember, these are people whose parents, school, university, whatever, has never told them anything relevant as far as the recovery of tradition is concerned, reducing it thus to a lifeless form. The so-called classicism, that is very interesting as well, is probably one of the most powerful, at least for like modern lens, means to actually explain people how the ancient regime worked and why in the wake of full Catholic tradition, even when it was represented by, say, Protestants. But even at the time, this had somehow significantly misrepresented the deep essence of humanity. This is the moment in which, especially after the Reformation, there was objectively, yes, just mostly some sort of aestheticistic taste, but the same elite was losing the sense of what that fundamentally was. That's why that opens to the age of revolutions. And Romanity inherently constitutes the synthesis of two traditions to an extent that seamlessly integrate to create a sacred reservoir, illustrated by the eternal flame of Vesta. This is a meeting point, again, between the perennial and the mortal. This flame remains vibrant and active as long as Rome exists eternally for its metaphysical achievement in the history of mankind, despite even her eternal symbol being unrecognized in this restless and chaotic world. Right? Does anybody care on Twitter about this? Go there and you see what kind of level of mental shortcoming people engage in just to get dumber faster than it ever happened. Right? This is worse than, I don't know, even 20th century communism, which is like basically the single worst thing you can actually imagine. There was even there, regardless of course, the mental deficiency of any people that partook in that, like at still a minimum level of, for example, concept of self-sacrifice, of catharsis. I mean, at least fascists and communists had the guts of getting each other killed against one another, which is, of course, what lesser people today are ever less capable of doing. I mean, they would still do, but just as passive slobs thrown into the meat grinder, right? Because that's also what the impression of communism fundamentally really was, right? So I always said it's not like, I don't know, you explode on a mine that you haven't seen, and that's sort of, you go to heaven. That's not how it works in tradition at all, right? not even sort of Islamic bombers or whatever. It has nothing to do with that, right? That's just essentially animals exploding, right? The same actual metaphysical value of a pig exploding. Now, descent is incredibly important in this regard, because don't think that namely traditionally inspired systems have actually anything to do with tradition. Zero, completely. That's why most people fundamentally hate also those who actually own the imperium today, which of course is the West, and this is at least in terms of world dominance and actual relevance, because they know they're less. Like, the typical characteristic of a lesser human being is the sense of shame, right? Especially this ignorance, that makes them think that others cannot see through, that they think that their thing is their own because it's special, just because they're hysterically paralyzed and terrorized by anything that they see as more successful, which, however, they do not understand, because of course they're not capable of attaining that. In any case, to separate and pit the two aforementioned traditions against one another while fragmenting them leads to a obvious as profound misunderstanding of the genuine and significant power of Rome in her metaphysical and transcendental eternity and centrality. This power transcends the historical, superficial, and contingent aspects of two traditional expressions. Instead, it embodies the affirmation of their shared principle, where the duality of the paths converges into the triumph of traditional unity. What did Marxists do? And why, even contemporary conservatives are so stupid to call themselves capitalists, for example, because it's actually a communist term that you've been enforced, in fact, like an animal, to repeat. They simply flipped tradition. I mean, they took everything from tradition, and they inversed that. Like, what was idealism, especially for Marx and Engels, from Feuerbach, Hegel, of course, Kant, it was just flipping it, right? Except, it does not really work when you flip it. And so they invented the classistic opposition as essentially two radically separated principles, eliminating the hierarchy and inexplicably provide people that are lesser by definition, even in the same Marxist sociological analysis, with a power that they do not know what to do, which is well exemplified by the totalitarian regimes that were always enforced on these lesser peoples in the history of mankind, exactly because that's what happens when revolutions happen. Like, it's not like, unless there is something, I don't know. Again, the French Revolution was definitely better than the Bolshevik one in that regard. There's a very specific meaning, and not just because Napoleon used eagles in his imperial army. There is much more to that, right? But people always lose ever more power, and to the point that they don't even necessarily even understand why that is the case anymore. Just paranoia. Paranoia is the first national identity of communist regimes, like probably the people that sustain those regimes, right? If you believe that regimes exist because they're imposed on you, you're just declaring you're anti-traditional, because you're just declaring that you're less than communism and you're subservient to it. As a collective body as well, if you're so interested in the, I have lots of, this is becoming embarrassing really, of neo-Nazis, even though undercover, that are basically trying to hope that I can see their effort as traditional in some ways, that have stopped practically understanding this very elementary fact. Like, if you are defeated, you're less. I don't know how to tell you that. And the racial body that you were, babbling about being the superior one actually was, should have taken over metaphysically. Why didn't it work? Seriously. I mean, why didn't other people join you? Like, it's not to say, again, that the others were better. if you pick the Soviet Union, actually have a difficult time in thinking there that there is anything better than the National Socialism. There were different things, and there were things for which, of course, like there were differences, not just like in one block or the other, in total, right? But at large, the sense that at least the Axis doesn't make it to convince the world is a deep metaphysical problem that lays, of course, in the fallimentary, like even Hitler, of course, basically repudiated the Germans notoriously in the Berlin bunker in 1945. He literally said that they were too much cowardly of a people for the mission they were called to perform. And, you would say, here is the same thing. You are the actual leader, and you're supposed to actually win that level of metaphysical transcendence, and you lose. I would ask a pair of things myself there. No doubt that that socialism, what half of Europe underwent after that, was just an abortion of the dignity of mankind under any point of view. But this is not really really an excuse for it having happened at any level, right? That's why the conventional references to this sort of right and left are just sticking to basically a completely post-traditional world in the 20th century, when that classical sort of political categorization has been bypassed by, Reddit people that now use stickers, tags to specify like what every person's political orientation is as if, there was this categorically absolute way of defining even what political orientations actually are. A person living 2,000 years ago would have just think of this just, let's exterminate ourselves 2,000 years before, because this is what we've gotten to. Like, remember, when you think that your ancestors, you're following that, what are you doing? Right? Being a fourth estater at the fringe of opulent societies that can't even, put his act together, and just claiming to be conservative by participating to extremistic groups that do not get anywhere in terms of power, as we see repeatedly of this waves of populism that definitely are sort of actually depauperating, degenerating the system, but obviously get eventually ruled by more competent people that are basically now doing something that all the actual propaganda that brought them in power has nothing to do with. For obvious reasons, they have to rule for real. And so it's a very interesting time to live in. I wouldn't say it's scary, but we could, of course, do better. But in general, like the level of politological analysis just from this data is so limpid, so crystal, that you can't avoid to look back at traditional unity and see the difference by itself. Now, both Classicism and Romanticism negated as a whole the essence of Rome by favoring one aspect of the dual traditions. Right? This again, it's not I have total problems with these movements. I've always been very clear in my content about this. It's not like I'm saying, I'm an anti-modern, hero that knows it all, and look at all these people were stupid, and they didn't. That's not how it works. That's in fact what those populistic individuals in the left and the right have been trained like guinea pigs to think, say, if that can be called thinking. Of course, you must have a higher culture, a superior culture, even before affording to think that you can be a man other than a human being. Now, one perspective, Classicism, manifests as a relatively lifeless marble formalism, lacking in spirituality. Believe me, I love 18th, 19th century statues, Western art in general, but that's in great part also what we're witnessing during the affirmation of the nation state. That is, in fact, the denial of that corporatistic theory of the empire. And as we were saying before, like, classes cannot be reconcile. I mean, classicism cannot be, of course, used as a effective mean of historical analysis, and if anything, because it's not like there isn't conflict between estates, but this is strengthening the hierarchy. There is always, in fact, a negative element the more you descend the hierarchy. But it's exactly the duty of those who are at the top to tame that and to transfigure it. That's all. And that's how you see here the top being of the hierarchy being gradually beheaded. Right? You have the first estates first ruling, then you have the third, now basically the fourth, right? Up to the 20s, you could say this guy is a bourgeois, so to say. This other is, I don't know, proletarian. Today, I can't see even actually what the average person has in terms of concrete value. First of all, of course, classicism, Marxism, we're just looking at the material side of the story to indicate this, but it's now the level of hierarchical understanding has been seemingly completely bypassed. If it wasn't for the fact that other power is manifesting in more oligarchic and authoritarian ways, and still a sense of the civic institutions, however, resisting to that, as we were pointing out before. Because these things happen over and over again. They were much scarier in the past. Excuse me, I drink a little. I feel a bit better today. I'm sick, so please excuse my even more lethargic than normal kind of speech, but these are also important topics that must take their specific time. While when you look at Romanticism, this represents a chaotic drive that lacks fulfillment and direction. I love Romanticism as well. I mean, I think that in this movement, just like also in Classicism, is much of traditional. You can argue it's virtus and, or better, disciplina and virtus, summing up, right? You see, they're parting ways, and there was a considerable effort in the 19th century, especially towards the second half, that is paradoxically also the more dysfunctional, to recover that now fully. This has a lot to do with the recovery also of an adequately, what we would conventionally call a scientific method today in historiography, like properly an awareness of what traditional religions were about. Right? This is really crucial. But again, you can even know that, right? But if you can't bridge the gap, still you go nowhere, right? You may know, but not having the force of getting there. And this is also ever more increasingly the case, because especially in like from a century or so, our mind has become ever more theoretical, right? This is much needed because of the unprecedented level of resources we have to administrate. But this is paradoxical, as we were saying before, like we have all this actual knowledge easily at hand. Nobody even studies that, and still, even when they understand it, they have difficulties even understanding what they have to do now. It's a serious problem. Like, how do you even initiate yourself to tradition? It's not that simple, right? You can easily get yourself killed in the process. But don't try it at home, at least in, without having gotten the fundamentals right. Now, one view perceives, again, back to classicism and Romanticism, the ancient tradition only through its external characteristics and limitations, while the other discerns the new tradition, disassociated from its roots though, devolving into vague meanderings and indistinct aspirations, which is again mirrored by the nation-state as well. The nation is the romantic part, the state is the classical part. And they're both needed. I mean, they were right. I mean, this is what we're seeing here is the gradual splitting of tradition over the years. Like you see this missing a piece every once in a while. The state remains self-referential. The Code Napoleon says that literally the source of law is the state. The only source of law is the state. So you fully secularize and modernize political culture. The nation intended in a, again, this is the state in a statalistic sense, that it's not like people do not actually have tradition or do not understand how to use the state functionally. This is how, let's say, is he who officiates the rite that makes the rite, not the ritual per se. This is very important. Equally, nationalism brought to this sort of self-referentiality of their own race without actually conquering the world in the process. I will not digress now on which people sort of rose and fell in this last few centuries to actually prove, however, that it wasn't even about that uniqueness. Again, they failed, right? So it's not like there wasn't something positive about it, as you can easily understand. It's that they completely put the nation at the center of everything without actually having any superior understanding of the traditional authority above that, right? It's just, again, a nationalistic and socialistic, because the two things never exist without the other. There is a reason if the Nazis literally called themselves like that. This is valid for all the other peoples who enjoyed that in different ways, but still, and taking their nation, people, or country as the sole point of reference would be kind of the point, right? But devoid of the sacred, you're attributing mostly the sacredness to literally dirt, right? And not seeing anything above there. But even so, even if you fully understood that superior mystic, so to say, which is also excessive, at least superhuman is something, super mystic, again, is the derailment of that in the traditional sense. In the moment in which you lose, that declares that you failed, that you were not up to the task. Especially if you start blaming others for your defeat, right? And you start pretending that there is an inferior race that controls everything, and immediately the fact of saying, in a traditional sense, that you're inferior to those, if you're not able to take over. So it's just ridiculous to begin with. And so this illustrates why Rome instead could uniquely embody two contrasting and opposing traditions, were it not for the inherent shared principle of unity within itself and the convergence of these traditions into the same truth, expressed in varying forms, that coalesces within the complete traditional cycle. The secular perspective is confined to a limited spatial and temporal viewpoint that, when detached from spiritual reality, lacks significance, or worse, forms a false construct. This is exactly what I've been talking about for years on here, and just also in today's video. This indicates that a single city might have been home to two distinct types of civilization over different periods. Instead of examining this significant phenomenon through the deep nature of traditional symbols, the investigation tends to focus superficially and externally, overlooking crucial aspects and concentrating solely on what is contingent and devoid of intrinsic worth. Look at how Roman history is being taught to you. Republicanism, sort of technologism, multiculturalism, not a mention of the imperial Catholic tradition, not a mention of the actual point of the entire empire. The most straightforwardly Claire made videos about this, of course, for the Eagle and more. Just recently one about the question here in the Indo-European tradition that were the same, also not just for Rome, right? And that is literally the single most important thing of the world that nobody actually even showed you once, right? They want just to show you racial ambiguity, socialistic issues, again, the sense of decadentism connected to, I don't know, strange factors that nobody knows, never mind starts talking about the religion, or even, never mind realizing that Christianity is a consequence, not a cause of the end of a particular standard there that Christianity is actually trying to fix, just like Buddhism for the Vedas. In any case, like all human sciences, history is restricted by the two fundamental constraints that humans encounter, because it's our own limit. There isn't like history sculpted in the universe in the way at least we learn about it. Time and space, which serve as the frameworks of an illusory unreality. People think that the Roman Empire ended in the West in the 5th century, leaving aside the Byzantines that also were still that. But you know, I made so many videos about this topic. To me, it's kind of obvious as a medievalist to say it, because again, these are major historiographical branches. Oceans of ink were spilled to describe it. The fact that the average person does not know that does not confer to the average person any relevance historically wise, right? It's like when people ask me, you know, for citations that I actually provide when I'm actually working on the sources for more sort of primary, sources analysis, but they are not capable of understanding that there is a overall knowledge that stems from authority and experience and competence that, you know, you should just want to hear, because this is exactly what we do as a living, and you cannot afford to accept it exists because it defies your deterministic, mechanistic, materialistic limitations in historical analysis, and especially education. Let's be honest now. Look at what the elite learned up to a few generations ago, right? We're talking European elite mostly, but not all. Life can be perceived as such when it is considered apart from its source of enduring reality, because history is about the reconstruction of this dynamic at the end of the day, which in fact does get down to the divine real. What's the point of studying like a copy of something else, where you have the something else, right? This is what all history shouts you, and you have been surgically brain programmed not to realize that, right? Because any realization of that would provide with actual power, and people cannot accept that others, especially, have more power than them, nor they can't learn how to handle it in the process, so that when they get it, they screw up most of the times. However, it becomes significantly enlightening when consistently linked to a higher reality that influences human progress based on the adherence to or divergence from traditional truths. Rome surpasses world history because it shapes it, acting as the singular power against which the claimed autonomy of humanity unfolds. Through a modern secular lens, these individuals are regarded as the architects of a historical narrative that traces its roots into the past, facing numerous intrusions that make it nonsensical to identify original centers where only currents that have formed through intricate underground forces exist. Beware again of what kind of worldly power you are winking at. That is not to say that there is not a value of merit in their difference either. You should always respect that. One need only observe that history is the realm of facts, of the external which is influenced by the internal. If we define the form as to which it is external in rhythms as that which is internal, we could argue that the rhythms inform the forms, meaning the hidden world directs the visible world in a purely relative reality that culminates in the completeness of silence. This ultimate realm, let's say better, symbolizes genuine power, and only those who attune themselves to it are able to participate, as they act in accordance with a providential law of development that is devoid of human, selfish, or individualistic traits. Such a law does not involve ethical or political considerations which, when divorced from divine truth, are thus fallible. Rather, it demonstrates divine evidence within the realm of facts. This assertion is that it is solely the sovereignty of the Spirit of God, that legitimizes every external achievement and every consciousness of autonomy rather than culture or intelligence, which are purely human constructs and are often even anti-traditional. Often. History does not outlast humanity, like it perishes along with mankind as part of the human illusion. Only the Spirit of God persists, having never ceased to exist due to its absolute originality. And so you wonder why I'm talking about this in a video about the eternal flame of Vesta. Well, because all this is symbolized precisely by the unquenchable fire of Vesta. In making this assertion, of course, we do not even sort of refute history or life per se, nor do we adopt an ascetic or pessimistic stance that contradicts the essence of Rome, because that's exactly like the wrong view that you mostly have about her. Such a position would, in fact, signal a misunderstanding of the traditional truths that form humanity's sole inalienable legacy. We contend that history and life possess the value of a shadow cast by a higher truth, which is and remains, creates and is not created, is productive and is not produced, and whose absolute nature transcends temporal contingency and the variability of spatial diversity. Detached from this truth, history and life are void. Right? They fail to justify or explain themselves as they inherently encompass their own limitations. This is like, again, science rocks is really cool, humanly speaking. For the rest, it's not like it's not cool or whatever. It simply doesn't have anything to do with understanding what the hell is actually going on. And of course, like, the average person does not even understand how these two realities exist, and so why it's not the simplistic, childish dichotomy. And again, that's actually the point inherent to the doctrine of the two natures. That is not a dualistic heresy, but something very different, and also actually very compatible with our scientific understanding, also because we could have not, in fact, understand it otherwise. And so that this limitation, right, persists even when extended into an indefinite haze in an effort to broaden the influence of such ideas and validate their significance, or especially in that case. Divine infinity must embrace all to genuinely embody its nature. Yet every moment and every part, when viewed in isolation, is meaningless. The entirety is complete, leaving no room for true division, save for an illusory separation, wherein the notion of individuality is a mirage akin to dreams experienced during wakefulness, despite the close-knit visions that often cloud the essence of existence. That's why the fire of Vesta is cosmically central, right? It's the meeting point between that infinite and, in fact, the entire world, right? In the way it has sort of been spiraling down. Nevertheless, Vesta's fire incarnates that literal principle. The imagery used across various traditions to express the inherent duality between the contingent and the necessary, the transient and the eternal, as well as the human and the divine, acts as a substitute for a demonstration that is impossible to achieve, as the nature of this truth is meta-rational. The symbolic language which embodies the essence of traditional expression can, when interpreted correctly at the highest metaphysical level, provide a means to approach the thresholds of mystery, beyond which realization unfolds in successive or integrative realms, reason alone, even when informed by revelation, cannot reach this threshold and must cease in the face of incomprehensibility arising from a dualistic opposition that it cannot reconcile. Any efforts in this area are bound to be unsuccessful. Dualism is nothing but what we said before about, say, Marxist classism, communism. It's always been the case. Like the anti-traditional element wanted to stress that there is actually a shortcut that basically denies everything that the world and incarnation signify. These are people who profoundly hate those who come close to that level of transfiguration and would like everything to cease, because it shows the measure of their inferiority in comparison. And naturally, this evil exists in as much as the self-sabotage property, in as much as, of course, all the world has the same problem. So everybody fails to an extent, right? You can't. That's why also in the corporative theory of the empire, you can't avoid having resistance from the lower estates. There should be, especially if they are strong, and so that you can see that they're doing something that should align, in fact, with the higher power, and you can co-opt and direct and command, right? If reason, especially, overly depends on its abilities and attempts to ascertain truth independently, it risks becoming anti-traditional, leading to a rebellion that, regardless of other considerations, denies the truth, as, again, the one of the last couple of years, an uprising of the profane against the sacred. This is what we've actually witnessed, which ultimately constitutes heresy and heterodoxy. For modern individuals who exhibit superficiality and inconsistency in their hasty intuitiveness, akin to the erroneous, perilous, and deceptive nature of the alleged mechanistic dynamism, it is essential to recognize that the traditional truths, rooted in divine origin and order, are deepened and enriched by enduring, lived experiences that have been passed down through centuries by those known as saints, sages, and masters. These individuals dedicate their lives to this pursuit, endowed with unique gifts that position them for genuine contemplation. How can any individual, especially one lacking such gifts, yet burdened with various biases, let's say, from their own presumption, attain these elevated truths without the guidance of tradition, which provides a pathway to them, given that they are a sincere reed that is open and yielding to the divine breath that provides redemption? Well, the modern mindset and sensibility, characterized by ignorance, rigidity, and aggression, stand in stark contrast to the tradition that requires a rejection of individualistic constraints, an absolute openness to truth, and the abandonment of the prejudices that flourish, particularly among those who claim they are free from them, asserting an originality that exists solely in a realm of expressive hysteria. Look at TikTok, basically. No era has been as inundated with superficial constructions built upon a singular foundation of anti-traditional debris as our own. We live in a time dominated by the composite and the heterogeneous, where rhetoric and sentiment, mechanical schematism and spiritual despair alternate with the instability of artificial flashes, far removed from the sacred, eternal, and unyielding fire of Vesta, which the Vestal virgins protect within the sanctum that I shall make a video entirely on the etymology of sanctum to understand what it really means. That is the enduring repository of Rome's sacred tradition. Reviving the spirit necessitates a return to the Romanitas, which entails suffocating the anti-traditional drive that resonates within both individuals and communities through the various melancholic manifestations of the modern aberration. This approach advocates for a return to traditional simplicity and an integral Romanitas through devoted and profound labor that begins in the spiritual realm, an essential and absolute necessity radiating with a dual movement, integrating every orthodox element while dispelling the useless and harmful remnants. Because, as we said at the beginning, we can always find traces, elements, hints to that in our entire knowledge. There wouldn't be knowledge without this fundamental presupposition. So that's actually a measure of human existence and potential to transcend themselves. And of course, this significant endeavor, particularly in light of the current chaos in the world, requires fulfillment from within rather than from the outside to ensure lasting and fruitful outcomes. It demands a new direction, presenting a revival of the ancient, constant, and eternal norm of Rome. The traditional reconstruction must hold universal significance, carried out under the banner of Rome, progressing slowly and deeply, bringing sacred wisdom to life, closing the temple to the profane, and reinstating traditional society following the hierarchy of castes aligned with nature and truth. Remember, there were always people fighting for this, that in any struggle there is one side that actually has it better. That may not be enough, as we were pointing out before, but this is valid really in any clash that was sort of a liminal point. And so only by doing so can contemplative and active life coexist. The one without the other doesn't make any sense, right? You can't be just a person pursuing success without actually building yourself up from a spiritual point of view. Which doesn't mean reading Sun Tzu and thinking that you're good at finance, right? That's just for mentally disturbed people that do not absolutely know anything, neither about one or the other, and end up, living in a car like junkies most of the time. Now, not merely, of course, this is important. You don't have to, of course, think that contemplative and active life obstruct each other, right? But actually, in a proper sense, they support one another. It is true that in many ways, people mishandle them, and so we are definitely much more contemplative than active nowadays, which is, it does make a lot of sense considering, as we were saying before, where we are as humans. So for the priests and warriors form the foundation, the legitimacy, and the assurance of complete traditional order. This is the sap of Catholic tradition, especially after the actual break of the unitarity of this. We're all both, we're all actually the entire, sometimes different levels of the same hierarchy, right? And you have to understand which one also you can sort of more to nurture more on the base of your background, of your predisposition. In any case, you would look at the meaning of the the priesthood, serving as the bearer of keys, and warriors as the bearers of power within the dual domains of contemplation and action, respectively. So the world, but in particularly the West, that is the one that, of course, has the strongest, the most original, the most sort of genetic, constitutional roots within the Roman tradition, must reclaim the latter to reclaim its unity. That otherwise cannot properly be achieved. You won't do that outside of Romanity. Everybody failed, right? And there is a reason why that is the case. This is not just another power. This is the power who managed to restore the Golden Age, and at the peak of that, providing with salvation with mankind as a proof of its achievability. This is also why, in fact, Christ was born under Augustus, right? And it's an incredibly powerful sense that reflects that unity. It's terrible to say. For example, I've been watching just a short bit of Peterson's series on gospel, the evangelical exegesis, and there were competent people showing him that this obsession with tyranny, even I was surprised there from people from countries that are pretty much obsessed with tyranny, actually were very well educated, or at least aware about the necessity of authority, like the fact that earthly authority is not just there for no reason to oppress you, right? This is how often conservatives actually buy into the fourth estate, actually socialistic, anti-traditional order, right? I personally think that Peterson is a very interesting figure for many reasons. He made many mistakes, though, and the reason is that he doesn't have a historical education matching his, evolutionary biological one, his sort of clinical psychoanalytical one. It's normal. But if you're talking tradition for Tolkien books, you can't just stop to like a few sources and then thinking that you know exactly what happened in the past. Mostly, I follow a lot like American political commentaries in general, and I do not see any of this realized. The necessity of Romanity in particular, but especially the sense that authority, power, and might does make right. Because all those who achieved something without knowing eventually how, because there was something good into it, but not understanding what the meaning of fire is to begin with, right? And the fact that you can actually create more energy out of it, that this does defy entropy, that this is at least what mankind is, just by its own apparent physical limits, if you just reason in a rationalistic way, is supposed to transcend, right? And the entire tradition talks to us about this. It is not simply, about some general, like, finding meaning thing. Like, it actually, means finding the right answer, right? Which is incredibly difficult to find. And so just certain life advice that remain pretty low-key, because at the end of the day, it may motivate you to some degree, but if you are hopelessly at that lower level and habituated to incredible moral, even before the material misery, the question is, how do you even approach this? Because many people, I don't want to sound snobbish, like saying, I dislike poor people. I don't. Like, for example, I have a very interesting family history, because my parents were baby boomers, and say my mother's side were very poor before that. Yet they were sort of the better people, because they didn't start whining or voting communist. They worked and they got it, right? Whereas it was sort of the more educated and rich paternal line that had all the means and actually came short of that in potential. So I actually have an enormous bias in favor of the pure, the simple. But it turns out that this is not like the majority of people. People still confuse this in a classistic sense with the common people being good and the elite being bad. No, it's the other way around. In terms of absolute worth, it's the other way around. And yes, of course, different people can define that. That's why class is not defining in that regard. But there are some things coming with the approximation that, of course, you can't deny. That, more socially diseased people commit more crimes at a disproportional rate. Like in post-socialist countries have been indoctrinated to think it's the opposite, that it's the rich, that is the established, that etc. That you actually nail that to some degree, at least more than others, that is the bad, corrupted person. That's not to say that handling power doesn't come with its twists, but without those twists, you wouldn't learn anything. And that's why, unfortunately, this also mirrors so many realities in Europe, but you can still find pearls there. And I know better, I must say, for those who at least know me, say my current, well, I will not say more, not about myself, but paying a compliment to a very specific person that is close to me right now, and that's why I feel so much for it. Well, I feel very much for this complementary, corporative, traditional hierarchy that is meant to help one another, but with the right answers, not being weak with one another, not being lenient with one another. Of course, all in the right measure. But who you are is not good, whoever you are, because unless you are God, there's really nothing to, and especially if you're mortal, in fact, at the end of the day, like there's nothing really to rejoice, even in those conventional standards. Right? I'm well off, but it's not like I think that my life is satisfied at all. Right? It's easier, but I realize that also comes with, again, the burden of becoming sort of more addicted to some of those advantages, and so not growing in other ways. And so other people can bring instead the opposite to that, and I'm very open to that. I think that's the right way of doing. I don't really want to pass like the ale of the situation, because sometimes it does seem like my channel sounds like that. That's not the point. The point is continuously striving towards the truth, and you just can't do you can do the opposite if you want. It's just, making you die faster in wars, right? But the sense is there is a meaning here, and we're not really even wanting to accept that there is. And then, however, again, there are people who know this, obviously. Any normally educated person should understand that. The problem is that from there, on getting competent, well, that's another path, another sword. And so this again, the world cannot reclaim its unity without the Roman tradition, especially the West, Roman tradition representing the most cohesive integration of the two orders that Europe cannot substitute or condense into one, something feasible in the past instead. That the world cannot substitute or condense into one something that was feasible in the past when the traditional estates would cooperate. Right? And again, the Ghibelline system contemplated priesthood wielding authority, ensuring strict orthodoxy without additional, with support, but still being competent at that. Like, the path back to traditional unity is dependent on the alignment of the spiritual and the temporal. You cannot have both without the others. You could come back into one. That's always, again, the point. But you must be aware of why what you see today has come to be the way it is. It's not even just about repeating the past, which can't be done by definition. It's about realizing how to get back in the way that is more effective, considering the circumstances, right? And so there are some clear natural gifts that people have, which frustratingly are often wasted. We all have the divine spark and potential. We'll pursue that. Understand what that actually means. Make it your lifetime adventure, so to say. Never disdain, nor action, nor contemplation, because without that, it's difficult to do anything else. Right? There's not a single way. It depends on you. All right. So again, I will probably rephrase the video, because we will have to talk about Vesta in more depth later in a second part. So I will title it in a way that at least will be more acceptable if you were up to the hype, especially the beginning. But again, it's you can't fundamentally even understand the fire of Vesta without the fundamental premise of a traditional Romanity, and why this is relevant. You have so many videos on the topic, especially in the history of religion playlist. Well, if you're unfamiliar with my work, check that out. Right, because that's actually really one relevant aspect. For today, however, I stop it here. I felt better by making a video, by the way. That's interesting. The Empire does really reward you if you just dare, right, together with discipline. I'm writing an article about this, believe it or not, the Ghibelline ideology, German knights back in the day. For today, however, I stop it here. Just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. As always, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.